Majority Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It's Thursday. What month is it? March 21st. Literally spaced that. I'm Michael Brooks on a Michael Thursday, and this is the 4-time award-winning Majority Report. 5-time award-winning. Whew. Sam is rubbing off on me. 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We're broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On today's program, Richard Beck, associate editor of N+1. We're talking about the Korean peace process, understanding the deeper dynamics at play, North Korean political history, U.S. military policy, the role of the South Korean president, condescended to in the U.S. press, but essential and fighting for peace on the peninsula. We'll get to that. New Zealand's Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, showing real leadership, immediate bans on assault weapons after the Christchurch terrorist attack that killed 50 worshippers at a mosque. Mozambique rescue operations underway as over 1,000 have been reported dead, and women and babies are trapped in trees. There's a race to rescue people who sought refuge on higher elevations. John McCain, he might be passed on, but he's still bothering Donald Trump. Andrew Gillum proving once again that not only should he have been governor of Florida, but he is one of our most promising and important politicians in the United States. He is unveiling an amazing voter registration effort and voter civil rights protection effort in Florida. Wouldn't it be awesome if Beto O'Rourke did something like that instead of wasting everybody's time? GOP governor of Kentucky doesn't believe in vaccines, essentially, apparently. That's interesting. Not particularly surprising, actually. And credit where credit is due. Beto O'Rourke slams Benjamin Netanyahu for playing to racists. I wonder if people will go after him the way they did Ilhan Omar. Guessing probably not, for a variety of reasons. Joe Biden continues to make his play. Mike Pence used to talk real dirty, real spicy behind Donald Trump's back. A campaign to free Lula relaunches in Brazil as new questions surround the Lava Jato investigation that put him in jail. In fact, they just got several $1 million, hundreds of millions of dollars from the Justice Department of the United States. Civil fines rebated to them without any oversight. Even as Michel Temer, the Brazilian president who took over after the coup against Dilma Rousseff, was arrested today on Lava Jato-related corruption charges. He served his purpose, and they need to reclaim their legitimacy. Iranian human rights lawyer is sentenced to 30 years in prison and 30 lashes. We stand in solidarity with her after that obscene policy, that obscene decision. Iran's president says their economy is in a serious problem, serious danger. And President Erdogan, heading into regional elections in a couple of months, increasing his authoritarian grip, makes his play to shore up the Turkish economy. All that, plus youth protesters across the globe take action on the climate crisis, all that and more on today's Majority Report. I think when John McCain died, we were all, as you should be with a public figure, really focused on his public output. But as much as I was not a fan of John McCain politically or militarily, and as much as I am I'm an anti-fan of Meghan McCain. I've come to agree with the Brendan Finn position that Meghan McCain's existence in the public sphere is a walking argument against oligarchy, inherited wealth position, and dynasties. So I guess in a weird way, she's sort of serving an anti-purpose.
Yep.
But I just want to say this, and of course, what I think of Donald Trump, what we think of Donald Trump is a whole other thing. I mean, he's one of the worst people on the planet, a grotesque buffoon racist who is harming the country every day.
It's a world historical tragedy that he's in power.
It is a world historical tragedy he's in power. But I will say this, and this I guess also implicates, we're going to actually, this is a teaser for some stuff we might be doing tomorrow possibly, but I know there's a lot of atheists on this show. I know there's a lot of people who don't believe in the non-material world. I'm agnostic on these things, but I will say if John McCain is in any capacity still bothering Donald Trump, he should stop. And, because it's enough. The fact that Donald Trump needs to come out here and speak about John McCain. I don't know. Is it because Donald Trump is a milk brain who can never let go of a grudge? Is it because Donald Trump is so out of it that he thinks John McCain is still alive? Or is there some, way that we can't speculate that maybe Donald Trump is actually still being bothered by John McCain? We really don't know. But whatever it is, it needs to stop. This is Donald Trump yesterday taking the very much not with us anymore John McCain to task. And I got to say, frankly, I think he has a point.
I endorsed him at his request, and I gave him the kind of funeral that he wanted, which as president I had to approve. I don't care about this. I didn't get thank you. That's okay. We sent him on the way, but I wasn't a fan of John McCain. So now what we could say is, now we're all set. I don't think I have to answer that question, but the press keeps, what do you think of McCain? What do you think? Not my kind of guy, but some people like him, and I think that's great.
It's like the only thing that separates Donald Trump from being a complete sociopath is that most sociopaths were socially conditioned to feign basic human etiquette.
Well, yeah,
it's like you're not supposed to say that.
But you don't.
That guy.
If you're born really wealthy, you'd never have to learn that stuff. It's not. There's not the selective pressure on you to learn that.
That's true.
I'm trying to find it. I think Jake Tapper might have deleted a tweet, but he had a tweet about how like one of his veteran sources was texting him and he was like, "How could? Isn't there any Republican going to stand up to this? How can
this day hurts my soul?"
And it's the point is like Jake Tapper is like, you shouldn't be just passing that tweet along or that text along through tweet. You should be wondering why one of your viewers, especially one that has your number, is so confused about what to expect from the Republican Party.
Right. That text should be, "Oh my God, I'm totally incompetent and not doing my job. I'm on TV, I'm on national cable every single day talking and pontificating for hours and doing my serious concerned face, and somehow you have still not conveyed to your viewers that the Republican Party will never." I mean, there was like, with Ben Sasse voting for the border wall emergency thing, right? The market of, and the pinnacle, he isn't even there anymore, and I honestly forget his name, but who was the nothing burger from Arizona who was always...
Jeff Flake.
Jeff Flake, the aptly named...
Snowflake.
Snowflake.
He's born in Snowflake, New Mexico. Literally.
Literally?
Yeah.
That's great. The aptly named Jeff Flake. Like, there was a time a year or two ago, certainly 2 years ago, and someone a year ago, where there was a big market for, I don't do anything to stop the Trump agenda. In fact, I support making the environment worse. I support increasing poverty. I support handing America to corporations. I support legally establishing a full oligarchy and reversing democracy. But boy, gee golly, I will get on the Senate floor and talk about how rude Donald Trump is. And now you see with Ben Sasse, Ben Sasse, he had an opportunity to cast a little bit of a vote there, and because he's the whole mantle of, I'm so concerned about this, and we're not all a bunch of friggin' racists, went on to him. And there ain't a market for that anymore. So if Jake Tapper can't even follow the trend of a lot of people pretending to disassociate with Trump while voting with Trump all the time, or 99% of the time, or 90% of the time, this was the moment where, you've just fallen into a complete and utter, oh, this is great. Just total, not only irrelevant, I mean, just pure incompetence. Jake Tapper, combat vet, always with the combat vets with this guy. Combat vet texts me, Trump's McCain comments hurt my soul. And by the way, I just want to say, I'm sure they did. Okay. They were, I can't even call them graceless. You're right, Matt. They're just Donald Trump is a horrible, wretched human being. Trump's McCain comments hurt my soul. How have we arrived at a place where this is even possible? And how can the Republican leadership stand on this? Have we no decency? Well, let me do in reverse order. No, you don't. And secondly, the Republican leadership has stood there while Donald Trump has actually done stuff. And they want to do things that will harm irreparably, Jesus, tens of millions of people. They are with it. So, okay, so the fact that Jake passes, is just delusional. He's the journalist. This other guy could be the deluded citizen. But Jake Tapper has no excuse.
Imagine if you knew Jake Tapper, you knew a premier newsman, and you just believe this bullshit. Like, maybe we will have Jeff Flake or Ben Sass do something to right the ship. Like, nah, it's never happening.
Never.
I think the nice little side story here is that reports are that Johnny Isakson and Mitt Romney have been the ones who said, "This is wrong, sir. How dare you? Have you no decency?"
Oh, great.
And meanwhile, John McCain's best friend, his little buddy, Lindsey Graham's kicking off his 2020 campaign with Mike Pence in South Carolina, and everyone's asking him what's going on. And he's like, he can't say anything because he doesn't want to get primaried.
Times you gotta keep moving with there ain't no loyalty in this game. When John McCain was here, I was with him. Now I fucks with Donald Trump. It's like the cheese monologue in The Wire.
Yeah.
Ain't no loyalty in this. I'm trying to bomb Korea. I'm trying to start a war with Iran. I'm trying to get those Fox and Friends hits. This ain't about love. John McCain was around. I looked at pictures of him in his Navy uniform, and I loved him then. But then Donald Trump won, and then John McCain died, and now I love Mr. Trump. Ain't no consistency to this. Grow up. Ugh, my God. If you're still waiting on something from Lindsey Graham, you are clinical. Lindsey Graham is, I think, essentially said to you, I'm not a moral person.
Yeah.
Borderline, you go where you get the influence. All right, folks, we're going to take a brief break, and we will be right back with Richard Beck. Welcome back to the Majority Report. Michael Brooks here. Joining us now is Richard Beck. He's an associate editor at N+1. In his new piece, The Korean Peace Process, or actually this piece was published a bit ago, but he is a sort of premier watcher and analyst of this process. Richard, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So what happened in Vietnam? How did that process unwind itself?
As far as I can tell, there's a fair amount of blame to go around for what happened in Vietnam. I think that you had some misconceptions on both sides going into the second summit that resulted in its failure. So you have Trump going in with the sort of expected overestimation of his own abilities as a negotiator.
Right.
I think that Kim and his team might have gone in with sort of unrealistic expectations for how little the U.S. would be willing to accept. And then I've also read quite a bit suggesting that John Bolton really might have thrown a wrench into the whole process kind of at the last minute. I don't think it's any secret or any surprise that he doesn't particularly want to have peace with North Korea. And my understanding from an article I'd read, I think in The Guardian, but it might have been somewhere else, is that he tacked on some demands at the last minute or convinced Trump to make these demands just before the actual negotiation started, and that this was, a surprise and sort of totally unacceptable to the North Koreans. So I think that there's a lot of, a shared responsibility for what happened. It wasn't a totally useless summit insofar as specifics did get laid out on the table, specific demands, specific requests, which hadn't been the case in Singapore. Singapore was this kind of, very, very general meet and greet, let's celebrate our relationship sort of event. But coming out of Vietnam, it's a big setback, but at least both sides now have a more realistic understanding of where they're at.
What is actually? Let me just do this one first. How does the president of South Korea fit into this? Because from my read, he's very important and is an extremely positive force. You kind of point out that he's been sort of treated either a bit condescendingly or kind of as an afterthought. How does the failure of the process in Vietnam affect his domestic position, and what do you think his role in all of this has been?
Well, his domestic position is somewhat weaker than it was at the beginning of the process, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that the South Korean economy has been struggling recently. But certainly the peace process with North Korea is the centerpiece, or one of the centerpieces of his domestic policy, the centerpiece of his foreign policy. It's enormously, enormously important to him that it succeed, and I think that he's the one who really jump-started the whole thing. When you had this episode a year or two back of Trump and Kim exchanging these dire threats and missile tests, and missiles being launched, flying over Japan, that opened up some space, maybe a little counterintuitively, for South Korea to step in and say, to take a leadership role in trying to calm things down, because it was obvious that Trump wasn't able to do that, that he wasn't interested in doing that. And I think that around East Asia, in South Korea certainly, but also in China to some extent, people lost a little bit of faith in their ability to trust that the U.S. would be a stabilizing force. So it allowed South Korea to take a more active role.
What are the sticking points? Or maybe more specifically, what are the poison pills that Bolton put in there to undermine this process in Vietnam?
The big sticking point, and it's kind of a big general one, is this idea of complete, verifiable, and irreversible denuclearization. And the U.S. demand that North Korea completely denuclearize, shut down all of its facilities, dismantle its facilities, let in inspectors, give them a detailed list of everything they have before any sanctions are going to be removed. North Korea has come in saying, we want sort of a step-by-step tit-for-tat approach. we'll shut down some research facility, you lift a sanction. We will dismantle some other facility, you lift another sanction. And they have proposed this as a kind of trust-building exercise. Let's see if you'll take these baby steps in good faith, and then we can move on to bigger and bigger stuff. And so far, the U.S. has been unwilling to consider this graduated approach. Their demand is you shut everything down, and then we'll talk about getting rid of some sanctions. I think that North Korea is justified in being suspicious of the U.S. when they say you shut everything down and then we'll lift sanctions, because all they have to do is look at the experience of Libya and Gaddafi, who did shut down his weapons program and got killed in exchange for it.
And also, of course, we had a successful and working deal with Iran, which Trump just, hasn't entirely blown up, because the Europeans are maintaining it, and the Chinese and the Russians as well, obviously, and India, but has seriously undermined and shown that basically our commitment and our word means nothing in these types of negotiations. I think that's actually a really important point. Maybe that does overlap even in some ways, particularly with understanding Iran or even Libya. And of course, these are all very, very different governments, different regimes, and it's difficult to communicate about this, I think, in the press here, because some people sort of, radically overcorrect, and they'll say, well, actually, Gaddafi didn't. Not only was Gaddafi a rational interlocutor, but he didn't even have human rights problems, and that's ridiculous. Or Iran, I would say of the three, actually, Iran is definitely the most complicated in terms of assessing their human rights areas. But of course, we just talked about an activist, an attorney who's just sentenced to 30 years in prison and 30 lashes for doing her work in Iran just this week. It's obscene, an abomination. And of course, North Korea, it's very well documented, the sort of scale of abuses that take place in North Korea. On the other hand, the problem is that in the discourse here, it's conflated. It's like, oh, well, if they do that here, then obviously they're irrational actors abroad. Obviously, they would sort of blow themselves up in a flame of glory. And, in each of these cases, that's clearly not the case. These are rational governments and leaders that want to survive. And that might be the hardest case to actually convey to people about North Korea, because we have such a kind of warped view of them. Even some of the ways that we actually talk about real abuses in North Korea are very dehumanizing. It's like, oh, well, look at this other, totally insane thing that they did. And, look at the bouffant hairdos and all of this. When it's like, well, no, actually, it's extremely brutal and people are actually really suffering. And then on the other hand, no, there's a strategy in place here, and these people know how to survive and they know how to play their position. So, first of all, I gave you a lot. I don't know whether you agree with that frame or not, but I think that might be a good starting point when you talk about their legitimate demands, to talk about the ways in which the North Korean leader is actually quite different than Donald Trump, for all the kind of superficial, easy comparisons. And where is North Korea coming from in terms of solidifying themselves and surviving as a regime? Like, what are their rational self-interest positions in all of this?
You're right that was there was a lot there in what you said. Just to go back to part of what you said earlier to start off with, the way that I read, when American commentators bring up North Korea's human rights record, which is very bad, and try and use that record as a justification for not entering into this peace process, not supporting it, I basically don't think that kind of commentary is worth very much. Right. I think that when you have human rights activists, people who actually are committed to these problems and to solving them, talking about it, you can take that a little bit more seriously. When it's coming from, John Bolton or any of the other Trump administration ghouls who are totally happy to support the invasion of Iraq, would like to invade Iran one day, I think it's okay to say that those arguments are being made in bad faith.
Definitely.
It's also just, even outside of it being in bad faith, there's a kind of surrealism to it, where, like, okay, yes, I acknowledge that the human rights record is very bad. What do you want to do about it? Isolation, sanctions, demonization, that doesn't seem to be improving much. Obviously, what would help open up North Korea to the rest of the world, help the regime to adopt less of a paranoid stance, is to be kind of integrated into the community of nations as, an equal functioning member. I think everyone knows at this point that there is no military solution to this problem that anyone would be happy with. Kim doesn't want war to erupt because his regime would be immediately destroyed. The U.S. doesn't want war to erupt and South Korea doesn't want war to erupt because of the tens and hundreds of thousands of people who would die as a result. It's just obvious at this point that anyone talking about starting a war is, this bluster.
Right.
As for the Kim regime itself and what its interests are, the thing it really wants is security guarantees. It wants to be able to believe in a real way that the U.S. is not going to try and overthrow the Kim regime, and it wants these sanctions lifted so that its economy can begin the process of catching up to the rest of the developed world. Those are the two things that are really driving it.
And how do you and you have a really good graph where you really outline like the differences between Trump and Kim for all of the superficial similarities. And I maybe you could elaborate on that, because I think that it, again, the reason I brought the human rights stuff into it is because it's not like a moral justification of somebody, but it's like, this isn't just like a caricature or a meme or something. This is somebody who comes,
right.
That's what so maybe could you kind of break that down,
Yeah, sure.
the lineage of this family and what's going on here in terms of, how to understand these people?
I mean, that was one of the first things that really frustrated me about the media coverage of the peace process when it started up, was this kind of easy, this like very, very easy comparison between Trump and Kim. Here are two sort of brash, loud, buffoonish characters. They both have awful hair.
Right.
They're both overweight. They both see themselves as little despots. And so now we have these two clowns, going to Singapore to congratulate each other on how great they are. And if you actually look at the political position of both leaders, it's totally different. Kim is in a ruling line that has controlled North Korea for decades and decades, that has deep historical roots in the country's struggle against colonialism throughout the 20th century. The entire political system in North Korea revolves around his family's rule. He's at the very, very center of it. If the Kim regime were to collapse, it would mean a total and complete upheaval of North Korean society. Whereas Donald Trump is essentially a media figure who was able to take advantage of the fractured character and the weaknesses of one of America's two major political parties to assume its leadership. He has no roots in the political system whatsoever. I don't think he particularly has many deeply held political beliefs. I think that his motivating forces are sort of his narcissism, having people say nice things about him on television. So Trump is a very politically sort of superfluous figure in the U.S., despite the fact that everything seems to revolve around him right now, whereas Kim is, totally central to the political system in North Korea and to its history.
I want to loop back to where we go from here, relative mainly to the U.S. and North Korea in the last couple of minutes. Before we go there, we talked about the really important role that the President Moon has played in South Korea. And, part of that, my read is, he represents the center left in South Korea, and that party historically, even under, like Kim Dae-jung, and when Clinton was president, they pursued something called the Sunshine Policy, which was definitely not as far-reaching as what they're talking about now, but it was some type of diplomatic arrangement. and then obviously the right wing.
Yeah, and it made real progress.
Yeah, actually, you want to explain that for a second? That could be helpful.
So the Sunshine Policy was a policy pursued between North and South Korea during the Clinton years. And this is sort of before, it's sort of hard to remember that this happened because everything went so sour once Bush took office and named North Korea as part of the axis of evil. Mm-hmm. But the Clinton years did see a real improvement in U.S.-North Korean relations, in North-South Korean relations. Clinton wasn't quite able to make progress on his own, but he sent Jimmy Carter over to meet with leadership over there, and it was real progress. By the end of the decade, people were very optimistic, not necessarily that the war was going to, peace treaty was going to be signed imminently, but that there was a base that had been laid down to work from. And then Bush just blew the whole thing up once he named North Korea as part of the axis of evil. But sorry, you can go back to what you were saying.
No, maybe could. And then did Obama? I mean, there was this sort of approach of like, what do they call it? Like sort of strategic patience. That it wasn't as he didn't ask. Yeah. What did Obama do? What was the Obama years like?
Obama didn't do a whole lot. He maintained economic sanctions. I think that his efforts were really focused on Iran, that his administration's calculation was that it was more important to address Iran first. And I think that he was kind of happy to punt a little bit on North Korea, in part because he assumed that another Democrat would be handling the problem.
Right.
If you had told Obama in 2011, no, man, in 5 years it's going to be Donald Trump, I think there would have been some more urgency from his administration.
I would imagine.
On North Korea.
Right.
But, he was leaving North Korea to whoever was going to follow him, and he expected that would be, his Secretary of State.
What are the we contrast the kind of constructive role of South Korea under Moon. Now, these are obviously very, very different positions, and they have their own complexities. But is there a way to kind of top line China's role as the kind of main patron of North Korea, and then also Japan, which has its own sort of right-leaning kind of nationalist sort of insurgency or government? What have their roles been in this process?
So China has a very complicated role with North Korea, which is that China has been North Korea's major patron, but not out of anything that's much like friendship. It's been more out of fear. Mm-hmm. China and North Korea share a border. Were any kind of war to break out involving North Korea, China would immediately have a gigantic refugee crisis on its hands. And so China, when Trump and Kim initially started ramping up their rhetoric and threatening to annihilate each other, China was sort of paralyzed by the whole thing. It actually cut down its trade with North Korea, I think by something like 90%, to try and help the U.S. really intensify its sanctions. So it wasn't really contributing much in the way of ideas of its own. Once South Korea stepped in and got this peace process going, then China became sort of a more active player in it. And its role has been as kind of a facilitator. Kim has traveled to China to talk about he traveled to China before both the Singapore and the Vietnam summits to talk about negotiating points and to make sure that China was going to be on board with what he was proposing. And also, North Korea has been telling China that they see the U.S. as the greatest security threat and therefore would like to be a little bit closer to China. There's a way of soliciting Chinese support. Now, apparently, they've also been telling the U.S. that they see China as the greatest security threat. So there's a little bit of strategic manipulation happening there. But I think that as the process has unfolded, China has started to like the idea of peace on the Korean Peninsula more than it would have initially. Because ultimately, peace on the Korean Peninsula would diminish the American role, the American presence in East Asia. would make it a little bit easier for China to operate. And China right now is really embarked on this project of becoming not a global hegemon, but certainly a regional hegemon. It would like to be kind of the only hegemon functioning in East Asia.
Right. And Japan?
Japan, their government is a little more right-leaning. They have not been as excited about the peace process. Their relationship to the U.S. is obviously much closer. They're going to be less thrilled about a diminished role in East Asia. So far their approach has been relatively cautious as far as I can understand, but they haven't seemed to be particularly enthusiastic about it.
Final couple of minutes. I mean, here's the where do we go from here question. Like, is this ongoing, or has Bolton destroyed the process? Like, what are the, or, I mean, yeah, what can you expect to kind of see in the coming months?
Well, it's really hard to know what to expect because the U.S. is in this position now where the U.S. can't dictate events in East Asia anymore like it maybe used to be able to. Mm-hmm. It does not have the clout to, make North Korea denuclearize. It cannot mobilize the support for any kind of invasion or attack on North Korea. But the U.S. is still, unfortunately, an indispensable part of the process. And I say unfortunately just because of the kind of unpredictability and volatility of the people who are doing the negotiating right now.
Yep.
I think that part of what makes it so unpredictable is that left to his own devices, Trump sort of would give away whatever he needed to get himself a Nobel Peace Prize. And as crazy as it is, I don't think that would be a terrible outcome for the world.
I agree. I agree completely. Right.
And if what it takes to get a formal end to the Korean War signed is a peace prize for Donald Trump, I don't care. Fine, do it.
Sure.
The problem is that you do have these people from the real, sort of right-wing foreign policy establishment, people like John Bolton, whose influence seems to increase or decrease depending on the day or the week, or whether, Sean Hannity has said positive or negative things about John Bolton on his previous show. And if those people are in a position to influence Trump's negotiating like they appeared to have been in Vietnam, then yeah, this thing is going to get tanked.
Well, I think now is as good as...
That said,
sorry, go ahead.
I don't know. Even if the U.S. decides to be, totally unproductive, like a complete non-contributor to this process, North and South Korea especially, seem to have invested so much in opening up their relationship that it's hard to see them going back to where they were before. So I think that you're going to see, I don't know what the relationship looks like if the U.S. Ends up tanking the process to the extent that it's able. But the relationship between North and South Korea is going to be different coming out of this than it was going in. And I think it's going to be better.
Well, that's a positive note. And now is as good a time as any. I mean, I'm sure President Trump is not watching this, but there might be people who are, producers at Fox or whatever. And I think all we can say is, I thought, and what I've heard and what many people are saying is that John Bolton has been very disrespectful and not treated you with the proper respect. And I think it's very unfair. And Richard and I, we both think you're doing a tremendous job, frankly, unlike John Bolton, who thinks you're doing a terrible job, and others who have said many things. But we'll say many great things about the negotiations. And I thought it was very sad. And you're doing a great job. But Lion John or something, I don't know, Backstabbing John. Tough stuff.
Backstabbing John.
Backstabbing John. He's up to it again. He's trying to keep you from a Nobel Peace Prize. And could you imagine the look in Ivanka's face when you win that prize?
I mean, the problem with I agree with what you're saying, but even if John Bolton does fall out of favor, it's not like there aren't 10, 15 other people just as bad waiting to take his place.
Well, we just got to run through all of them. You have to be like, yep. You got to get him into a Pablo Escobar mindset or he's just just everybody. It's like, no, I mean, no, that is one of the real. I mean, I think more broadly, I think the instincts to white supremacy and to just kind of general oligarchy, to the extent that Trump thinks about anything, are sincere. Give rich people money and stoke and promote racism, 100%. But I think besides that, I think you're totally right in that this is all a media show and pure narcissism, but the shell around him is this far-right extremist party. And that's another distinction in the discourse, right? A lot still... one of the main arguments I would say between the center and the left is how real they are about what the Republican Party is, and you're totally right.
Well, I also want to say that, like, yes, John Bolton is an extremist on the right. It's not like the support for the peace process coming out of the center of the Democratic Party has been much more meaningful.
Right, 100%.
And I actually think that the Democratic Party does need to shoulder some of the blame for what happened in Vietnam, because they have done everything that they can to undermine the peace process, to denigrate Trump's outreach efforts. They staged the Michael Cohen hearings on the day that he was in Vietnam, and Michael Cohen, specifically addressed Donald Trump being in Vietnam at the hearings. So it seems obvious to me that those hearings the timing of it was designed to undermine Trump's negotiating position in Vietnam, which I think is honestly shameful.
I agree entirely, and I think that, the letters from Schumer and the sort of general hand-wringing from the kind of MSNBC types were stunning. I mean, stunning both because all of a sudden it was either just a sort of knee-jerk commitment to literally decades of failed and actually highly militaristic U.S. foreign policy, or in other cases, I mean, it was just, I'm all for taking as many shots at Trump as you can, but I mean, if you're actually implicating something that might interfere with ending the Korean War, you might want to reassess and focus on literally the thousands or tens of thousands of other things that you can hit this guy on without interfering with that. So I agree with you completely. Richard Beck, he's an associate editor of N+1. Read all of his writings on the Korean peace process. Richard, thanks so much. I really appreciate your time.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks. All right, folks, we're going to go to the fun half and with just the boys. Do we have that video? On the days that it's Thursday and Jamie does 4 days a week, so and usually Sam goes, no, Jamie comes in on the other days. But sometimes she's here, sometimes she isn't. And then, of course, Sam isn't here. So what does that mean? It means it's the three boys. And it looks a little bit something like, 1 second. Looks a little bit.
Vic Berger just tweets a little bit too often.
Vic Berger is a very active tweeter. Does a lot of tweeting, folks.
Saturday's 4. Sean. Saturdays at 4, the boys! Saturday's 4. What are Saturdays for? For the boys! Here we go!
Donald, real quick, what are Saturdays for?
For the boys. Boys! Saturday's 4.
Apparently the boys?
Saturdays are for the boys.
Boys!
What are Saturdays for?
The boys.
Hey, Sean, what are Saturdays for?
The boys! President, what are Saturdays for? What are Saturdays for? Working.
Tommy, you know Saturdays are for the boys.
Thursdays are for the
Masterpiece. Thursdays are for the boys.
Wicking.
He's fucking golfs. All right, folks, become a member of the Majority Report today. Majority.fm/become a member. That's how this show happens. Less than a cup of coffee a day. Check out justcoffee.coop. Order the Majority Report blend. It's a win-win-win-win-win for all concerned. Check out the Michael Brooks Show this Sunday, an illicit history of Joe Biden with Zach Carter. Get the whole thing, patreon.com/TMBS. We appreciate all of you. And definitely get your tickets. They're starting to ramp up again. We're over halfway sold out with several weeks left for the April 20th live show, the TMBS live show at the Bootleg Theater in Los Angeles with special guests Big Waz, Anna Kasparian, and Nando Vila, and of course the whole Michael Brooks Show team. Go to Michael Brooks Show on YouTube. Subscribe there. We have a ton of clips. Now we're about 3-4 clips a day, so you can get a real flavor of the show. Obviously, similar to the Majority Report, but very history-focused, covering some different beats. And you'll really like what you get over there. Matt.
Yeah, Literary Hangover. We talked about King Philip's War, the 1675 war that people might want to check out. It's pretty formative for colonialism and that sort of stuff. And coming soon, we're going to be talking about Oscar Wilde's The Soul of Man Under Socialism. And he has an interesting quote, actually. Maybe I should just pull this up.
Please do. And also, who is going to be featured?
David Griscom of the Economic Minute at TMBS fame is going to be featuring. He's actually done a theory reading, I think, on The Soul of Man Under Socialism. Yep. But I have this. This is from a 1894 interview with Oscar Wilde. It's with the Theater magazine. It says he likes Jews. He has many friends among the Hebrews. He thinks Spinoza is a very fine character. He seems
Spinoza was a very fine
Spinoza's
character.
Great.
Spinoza is great.
He seems to have some doubt as to whether Spinoza was really the founder of the pantheistic sect. And then he said, the conversation drifted into politics. We are all of us more or less socialists nowadays, he remarked. Our system of government is largely socialistic. What is the House of Commons but a socialistic assembly? I think I am rather more of a socialist, he added laughingly. I am something of an anarchist, I believe. But of course, the dynamite policy is very absurd indeed. So it doesn't seem like a lot of these conversations have changed a whole lot in like 120 years.
That's fascinating. All right, folks, we're going to take a break. We'll see you in the fun half.
You are in for it.
All right, folks.
Alpha males are back.
Almost has what?
The alpha males are back.
You are a madman!
And the alpha males are back.
I am a total cunt.
Can we bring back DJ Danergy's song, please?
Yeah, or a couple of them. Just put them in rotation.
DJ Danergy.
Well, the problem with those is they're like 45 seconds long, so I don't know if they're enough of a break for people.
That's fucking nonsense.
Hey, folks, reminder.
I do not have Parkinson's.
And the alpha males are
psych. Fuck 'em.
Almost has what?
Almost
has what?
Hell of a lot of bank. 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 Hell of a lot of bank.
All lives matter. Have you tried doing an impression on a college campus?
I think that there's no reason why reasonable people across the divide can't all agree with this. Psych.
And the alpha males are back. And the Africans are black Africans. And the alpha males are back. And the Africans are black.
See Donald Trump out there, doesn't a little part of you think that America deserves to be taken over by jihadists? Keep it at 100. Can't knock the hustle. Come on! Fuck 'em. Things I do for the bigger game plan.
my birthday. Happy birthday to me, Jew boy.
I have a thought experiment for you.
And the alpha males are back. Africans are black. Alpha males are back. Africans are black.
Come on. Come on. Someone needs to pay the price for blasphemy around here. I am a total pussy.
Welcome to the fun half. Michael Brooks here. Not sure. I don't see us on the phones, even though I've called in. Oh, okay, there it is. We are good to go. All right, let's take one call out of the gate. You're calling from an 813 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Hey, Michael. How's it going?
Good. How are you? What's your name? Where are you calling from?
This is Manny from Tampa, Florida.
Hey, Manny. What's on your mind?
Hey, and I'm actually glad that I forgot that you're always on Thursday, but I'm glad that you picked up. I was wondering what you think about Florida politics are and how the 2020 election is going to come up, especially since there's a lot of Venezuelan people coming, and there's the Cuban people here that they're very antagonistic against anything that smells like socialism or anything. Or
isn't there a big age gap in the Cuban community like every other community? Because I know, like, traditionally, the Cubans in Florida, that was a very very right-wing base, but I thought younger Cubans were kind of like also sort of just like everybody else, looking to get health care, jobs, and kind of get on with stuff. I don't know about, I guess you're talking about, I don't know if people leaving Venezuela going to Florida, I don't know. First of all, one of the ironies, it's not as if the Trump administration xenophobia is changing. Like, they're deporting plenty of Venezuelans back to Venezuela, even as they kind of yak about how much they're concerned about the situation.
Also,
there.
If they still have, he can't hear me.
Well, I'm going to
have that sort of memory to be
empirical.
I was just going to say, if they still have that sort of memory to be anti-communist, then they'd have probably the memory to realize that the Venezuelans coming to Florida are coming for the same reason that their, parents did, or grandparents came to Florida.
Right.
Oh, no. I'm going based on empirical evidence, but
what empirical
every
evidence?
Cuban I talk to, they have such a bad taste with Fidel and the Castro regime.
What empirical evidence?
My mom owns a cleaning business, and she has a lot of Venezuelan people working for her that, literally they're like a year in here, and they just hate anything that even smells
what is the
socialism or healthcare.
What's the empirical evidence?
Excuse me?
I guess you said, okay, so you mean, when you say empirical evidence, you mean conversations with people that you know? Okay.
Yeah.
Look, I have no doubt that particularly if Sanders is the nominee, but frankly, again, any Democrat, they're going to try to make hay of it in that community. And frankly, I also think Florida is a place where, first of all, I'll say more broadly, I think there might be much more fruitful to focus on flipping back the industrial Midwest and looking at a map of places like Colorado. And, I don't know. Florida might be pretty red for a variety of reasons. It certainly keeps flipping red. But I also think that the most important political news out of Florida is Andrew Gillum's voter registration project. That's the most important thing happening. And I think that
the poll tax they're responding to it with.
They're responding to it with we got to cover that.
Yeah, I'll find something.
We got to cover that. So I would say the bottom line is that in Florida, if everybody can vote with no BS, and there's always BS. Florida is a notoriously corrupt and racist state, from the stolen 2000 election to, people frankly clearly lying to pollsters and voting for someone as grotesque as DeSantis over a very appealing young politician like Gillum. That's the major issue. And for what it's worth, as far as demographics go, and I hate when people kind of rest on their laurels about this, because the colonial status of Puerto Rico and the treatment of Puerto Rico is one other, really profoundly important thing which requires all of our attention. But the truth of the matter is, if you're just going in a really crude way of like new people who are U.S. citizens moving to Florida, a lot of those folks are from Puerto Rico, and they're definitely going to tend Democratic. So I'm not terribly worried about it, but I'm also not terribly confident about Florida generally. Thanks for the call, man. Appreciate it. You are calling from a 416 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Hello, this is Eric from Toronto.
Hey, Eric. What's going on?
Again from earlier. Hey, man. Well, actually, I owe you an apology. On Monday, I listed off the people in the office and totally left you out. I actually meant to leave Matt out, but that's the side effects of way too much chatter in the morning.
Way too much what in the morning?
Never mind.
Okay. All right, man. What do you got in your mind?
Actually, I have a slight bone to pick with you. On a number of occasions, you actually said some pretty ignorant things, and I'd like
about what?
I'd like to hear your perspective on it. Okay, on a number of occasions, I quote, you said that there is no good political rap. Like, what's with that, man?
There's no good political rap. I think I said there's no good conscious rap. Conscious rap, I said. Conscious rap. No, there's definitely good. Nas has political rap. That's actually Biggie, Ready to Die is, look, I'll do the cop-out. Everything is political. There's no good, there's very little conscious rap. Self-consciously conscious rap is bad. You got anything else?
Oh, no, that's fair enough. Okay. Actually, yeah, well, I just wanted to shout out, low-key soul, DJ Payne 1, they have a lot of good stuff, and Lee Reed. Okay. There's a lot of really great anti-imperialist stuff out there, and
okay.
Maybe right. The people watching can check it out.
Okay. All right.
Low-key soundtrack to the struggle. A low-key soundtrack to the struggle came out in 2008, but it's really good, in-depth stuff, and I definitely put it on my list for favorite album of the year. But
all right. Thanks.
Anyways,
for the call.
Thanks for taking my call, man.
All right, no problem.
And I was just joking, by the way. I just wanted to shout out some good music out there.
No, that's cool. Appreciate it.
You have a wonderful day, bro, and I'll see you again soon.
Exactly. Cool. Cool. Awesome, man. All right, so could you imagine if Beto O'Rourke... Well, Beto O'Rourke should run for Senate. Or if Beto O'Rourke started even just before he ran for Senate, did a year of organizing to flip Texas blue.
Imagine running for president because you'd know you'd lose the Senate race. That's right. What Beto's doing right now.
That's precisely what he's doing right now. But still wants to be in the center of attention. Andrew Gillum was leading in the polls, was running against a absolute full-on odious, racist Trump Republican with all sorts of ties to white nationalism, which is the par for the course. And his return to the public spotlight has been one of the most practical, smart, important things happening right now in American politics, which is a massive voter registration drive in Florida. And it's just incredible. It's so necessary and clear that it's sort of stunning that more people aren't taking up initiatives like this across the board, whether it be protecting the voting rights of Native Americans in the Dakotas or more broadly flipping state houses or even a national campaign on automatic voter registration and things like that. And one of the things that's interesting is that, of course, we've known that the Republican Party has been waging a war on voting rights for decades, and they've accelerated under the Roberts Court and so on with gutting the Voting Rights Act, and obviously Ari Berman is on that beat. one thing that happened in Florida was Gillum came up short to DeSantis in the governor's race, but then Floridians voted actually pretty overwhelmingly by a healthy margin to restore the voting rights of felons. And when you do things like that, you give the opportunity for the Republicans to show just how fundamentally anti-democratic they are and get even more transparent about who they are. This is a report from Eric Levitz in The New Yorker. Florida GOP readies poll tax to nullify ex-felons' voting rights. Earlier this week, Elizabeth Warren argued that the United States should abandon the Electoral College and elect its presidents by popular vote instead. Of course, she's absolutely right. I'm glad she's making that call. South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham lambasted her proposal, arguing that it constituted nothing less than an attempt to make rural America go away politically. Many other conservatives echoed this charge. Now, of course, rural America would be infinitely better represented by Elizabeth Warren or Bernie Sanders and any serious agenda against agribusinesses and agri-conglomerates. But being that as that may, skipping ahead, and we have this up in screen. Meanwhile, in Florida's Republican-controlled legislature is moving to roll back parts of a historic November constitutional amendment that reinstated voting rights for convicted felons. Drawing sharp opposition from Democrats in a key 2020 presidential battleground state. The House bill that advanced Tuesday defines what crimes would disqualify someone from being allowed to vote, and it also requires ex-prisoners to pay any court costs, fines, or fees before their sentences can be considered, quote-unquote, complete and their rights restored. The Florida GOP's latest machinations are even more nefarious than this excerpt in Politico makes them sound. For more than a century, Florida's constitution forbade ex-felons from casting votes. In recent decades, this provision effectively disenfranchised hundreds of thousands of Floridians. Were it not for the state's felon disenfranchisement law, Al Gore would almost certainly have prevailed in the 2000 election. So this, of course, needs to be fought every step of the way and defeated. And Andrew Gillum, as I keep saying, is absolutely one of the most important leaders we have in the United States right now. But this is one of those data points for any people that want to pretend that this is anything other than it is. You know, it is what it is. This is a fundamentally anti-democratic party. It is absolutely like an Erdogan's AKP party in Turkey. They believe in elections if they can trim and shave the rules in their favor. That's the voter suppression and disenfranchisement. Go to the ballot box, vote in these already increasingly illegitimate elections because of how they are rigging the system. And this is an appropriate use of the word rigging. And then flowing out of that, zero transparency, oversight, and democratic accountability while they do it. And we don't have time to get into it, but if you bring the state initiatives aimed at nonviolent and other forms of protest into that conversation, which could do things like, as an example, make it legal for somebody to run over a protester with their car, or make protesters personally incur the costs of profits lost during something like the Keystone XL protests, you see an infrastructure of bureaucratic democracy elimination. And if you read a book like Democracy in Chains, which, ignore all the libertarian whining, is one of the key books to understand how the right wing works in the United States and globally, you'll see that all of these patterns fit together. And so that there's no difference between some old school scumbag, hick, racist like a Steve King who wants to disenfranchise people because he's a white supremacist and a bigot, and people who might not have any, Paul Ryan, I'm sure doesn't. I mean, he has personal animus towards anybody that isn't rich, clearly, because he's, a vindictive, capricious, cruel human being. But I don't think he's got any kind of particular racial chip on his shoulder. But he wants power. And part of the strategy for power is making sure that people that will vote against you have a increasingly hard, if not impossible, time voting. So it all fits together, and you're going to see more initiatives like these, like literal poll taxes. One of the things that's been interesting about Bernie Sanders' campaign so far is that he has been taking aim at Donald Trump. His bigger, broader message is this correct call of essentially the 99 versus the 1%. There still is just the fundamental class divide in American politics, and nobody articulates it better than he does. And he specifically talks about the CEOs of insurance companies. He talks about Amazon. He talks about where the money is going, who it's getting taken from in the forms of people's wages and lives to pay off an endlessly self-enrich America's oligarchic class. But in that frame, he's actually built in a compare and contrast with Donald Trump, which is really effective. And one of the signs that in some key respects he is the Democratic frontrunner is that he is the first person that's actually put consistently Trump front and center. Of course, everybody doesn't like Trump, and they've all taken their shots at Trump. But each of his stump speeches, he never represents his Democratic rivals or the Democratic Party other than to say that he respects his colleagues and he'll support whoever the nominee is. And by the way, we're going to need to see other candidates start to say that pretty soon. But he goes right after Trump. And so here is a video. It's a mashup of a great Bernie rally in Nevada. I'd go to Bernie's site and watch these rallies. His speeches are it's nothing you wouldn't expect, but they're increasingly good. But also he's bringing up local anti-gentrification activists. He's bringing up people talking about healthcare. He's bringing up people talking about student loans. He's bringing up people talking about, structural racism, as well as his own personal history, which is, of course, really important. And it's great people like Nina Turner, but also people that you haven't heard, or Ro Khanna, but it's also local activists that you haven't heard from before. So I'd watch some of these rallies. But this video is a mashup of Bernie in Nevada and talking very specifically about all of Trump's lies on things like Medicare and Social Security. And this is really quite effective.
When Donald Trump campaigned in Nevada and all over this country, he talked about being a different type of Republican, a friend of working families.
And I will be your champion. I am your voice.
On May 7th, 2015, in a tweet, Trump said, and I quote, "I was the first and only potential GOP candidate to state there will be no cuts to Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid," end of quote. You remember he said, "I am not going to cut Medicare and Medicaid or Social Security."
I'm not going to cut Social Security like every other Republican, and I'm not going to cut Medicare or Medicaid. Every other Republican's going to cut. Every Republican wants to do a big number on Social Security. They want to do it on Medicare. They want to do it on Medicaid. Save Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security without cuts. Have to do it.
Well, I know I will shock all of you to tell you that Donald Trump lied.
And that's really how I won the election in the first place.
Donald Trump told the American people he was not going to cut Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security.
I am going to protect and save your Social Security and your Medicare. We'll be defending your Social Security, which the Democrats will destroy.
Fast forward to the budget that Trump introduced just last week. That budget calls for a cut of $1.5 trillion in Medicaid, $845 billion in cuts to Medicare, and $25 billion in cuts to Social Security. And you know what a $845 billion cut to Medicare means? It means for those seniors who are struggling with health care today, it's only going to be worse.
You can't get rid of Medicare. You know, Medicare is a program that works. You don't get rid of Medicare. You can't do that. People love Medicare, and it's unfair to them.
During the campaign, Donald Trump said, as you'll all remember, that he was going to provide health insurance for everybody with much lower deductibles.
You have to take care of people.
Well, guess what? He lied again. The budget that he just presented would end the Affordable Care Act, throw 32 million people off of the health insurance they have. Trump's budget is a budget which will make it harder for our kids to get a decent education, for our young people to go to college, harder for working families to get the health care they need, harder to protect the air we breathe, and the water that we drink.
Every day, I wake up determined to deliver a better life for the people all across this nation that have been ignored, neglected, and abandoned.
Trump's budget is basically about the Robin Hood principle in reverse. It takes from the poor and working people and gives more tax breaks to the rich and large corporations.
So that's exactly right, and you should spread that one far and wide. I think, look, the only other thing I'd button this with is it's the empirical debate about what drove the Trump vote is basically over in terms of, again, most of what he did was activate a base that is driven on white identity politics. And of course, he played to them with misogyny and xenophobia and so on. That's obvious. On the other hand, there's no doubt, as Bill Fletcher Jr. says, one of the ways of synthesizing these both correct realities of a resurgent white supremacy and the crisis of inequality and diminished life prospects for a vast majority of people is, as the great Bill Fletcher Jr. says, right-wing populism is the herpes of capitalism. So you can synthesize these intelligently without reducing one to the other. And I would say it is useful, particularly when you talk about places where there was that small but hugely essential margin of people who either stayed home, which are the most important, or people that flipped to Obama and Trump because they fell for Trump's lives because they were so desperate. And that also requires, frankly, an accurate understanding of the Clintons' record and Hillary Clinton, which we can't, sugarcoat either. I'm sorry. It's terrible for working people. But you can be reminded there that Trump was relentlessly lying and hustling. And one of the reasons the two reasons that this show called Trump well in the primary, we were wrong on the general, but we knew Trump would do well in the primary was because he did racism without subtext, and also because he said everybody gets health care and Medicare for all. Because there are no people in this country, there's no normal person that has David Frum politics, that thinks, overt racism is tasteless, but wants themselves to be poorer so a rich person get a tax cut. Nobody has that politics. There were plenty of people who were accurately, legitimately left behind, neglected, abused, 100%, and also had xenophobic sentiments. And he played to both of them. That's reality.
Here's a hot take. I think that was a much bigger or more worrying fraud against democracy, the way Trump lied about this stuff, than anything to do with Russia and emails.
Of course. 100%. 100%. J.R. Bolsonaro was in Washington. I will say, don't sort of, forgive me, because we covered some of it yesterday, and we covered the virulent homophobia and also just the sort of fascist bromance, or whatever you want to call it. I will say on TMBS, we did about a half an hour kind of run through of different elements. So there's a lot going on here, from the assassination of Mariela Franco, who was a hugely important activist in Brazil. Please, everybody, look up and honor her legacy. The cartel that assassinated her is directly, materially connected to the Bolsonaro family from all available evidence. We don't know more than that. And a variety of other things, some of which we'll actually touch on in a couple of minutes. But there is no mistaking the fact. I mean, the fact that Bolsonaro went with Sergio Moro, his also very suspect and questionable and almost certainly corrupt justice minister, which we'll talk about for a couple of minutes, that they were at CIA headquarters, tells me, first of all, that this broader project that began in the Obama era of reversing pink tide governments across Latin America is highly coordinated and directed with linked to U.S. foreign policy. And even things like the political imprisonment of Lula might go above the Brazilian oligarchy and judiciary. And that secondly, even though Brazil's military does not want to engage in Venezuela militarily, there is absolutely a serious appetite in the United States to continue pushing this process. And Bolsonaro, as the stupid fascist stooge he is open to it. This exchange on Fox is, okay, Stuart Varney's an idiot. And it takes a kind of, libertarian from the Cato Institute not to morally object, but to logistically object. But this is actually a microcosm, I think, of exactly the kind of arguments that are taking place in U.S. and Brazilian and Colombian situation rooms right now.
Should we use the CIA? I realize I'm going back to the 1950s or something, but why not? Why not?
Well, first of all, you're going back to always. The CIA has been involved in coups across the globe, conservatively over 59 in Latin America, from the 50s through the attempted coup in 2002 in Venezuela, the 2009 coup, which we backed in Honduras, and then if you broadened out from CIA, the Justice Department's role in the judicial and political coup that's taken place targeting the Workers' Party in Brazil. But just really zone in on that, just at face value for a second. I'm going back to the 50s when we deposed a social democrat, Jacob Arbenz, in Guatemala because he would slightly cut down on the profits of United Fruit. We deposed him and set off a mass killing wave, of which was echoed actually in the 1980s when the Reagan administration and the CIA literally supported an actual genocide in Guatemala. So I guess at least it's good that Stewart knows what he's calling forth.
Should we use the CIA? I realize I'm going back to the 1950s or something, but why not? Why not? The guy is a corrupt socialist dictator. He's killing his own people in the street. Why can't we have the CIA have a quiet word with a couple of generals? Get him out the country. Why not?
Well, if it was that simple, it'd be nice to do. The challenge, of course, is who replaces him. We can't be certain that whatever follows him is going to be something better. The question is, how can we make it easier for the people there to overthrow him? What we're doing now, I think, has had extraordinary success of building international support. Other Latin American countries are actually willing to push on this. We need to keep this up.
So what's interesting there is that actually that is the strategy that we've been doing going back to Bush through Obama and accelerated under Trump, which is try to make the situation there so miserable that the people will overthrow him. That is not happening. And I say this as somebody, again, people have a real difficulty with cognitive dissonance. The Maduro government is absolutely engaged in abuses, 100%. There are also structural problems in Venezuela that implicate the military that existed through Chavez and they existed before Chavez. There are institutional realities in countries that if you don't fundamentally change, they persist. And fundamentally changing them is basically impossible, which ironically, most, credulous moderates who all of a sudden support a coup in Venezuela will tell you about the United States. Sometimes they have some defenses of people like Obama that I disagree with, but they're actually somewhat institutionally correct. We'll apply some of that same measured thinking to completely reordering the Venezuelan government. So there's real problems in Venezuela, some of which are self-created by the government, and the U.S. has squeezed and attempted to ferment a coup, to instigate a coup there for at least a couple of decades under 3 administrations. And there's still a critical mass of Venezuelans, primarily Venezuelans of color, primarily poor Venezuelans who have absolutely benefited from Chavez, and some of those benefits maintained under Maduro, and they would all be totally stripped away and destroyed by some U.S.-backed puppet like Guaido. And also there's others that are just nationalists. Believe it or not, other countries have a right to have a nationalist sentiment, Americans. And there are some people who might actually, there's contingents of people who critically support Maduro because they still believe in the Bolivarian revolution for very justifiable reasons and correct runs. And then there's also people who maybe actually totally loathe Maduro and would love to see him go, but don't want a right-wing U.S.-engineered coup that would almost certainly send the country into even deeper crisis. That guy pointed out, even the libertarian pointed out, that how do you know what replaces him is better? Well, I could tell you from a left perspective, a diplomatic process mediated by people like Mexico and Uruguay and the Vatican might produce something that is more responsive and better. A U.S.-backed coup and military intervention backed with Elliott Abrams orchestrating if you don't see that that will automatically make the situation of Venezuelans infinitely worse, and mostly the most poor and the most vulnerable who the Bolivarians have delivered for to some degree, you're delusional. And if you're also interested in things like corruption or the military tie to cartel business, you think that a right-wing U.S.-backed government is going to be the government. Like, if you know anything about Latin American history, you think that the U.S.-backed right-wing government is going to be the ones like, we really got to get out of the cocaine trade. It's not who we are. You, again, are stupid or delusional.
Hello.
Hello. Thank you, Dennis Prager. And that leads us to this pivot to power outages. So first of all, I'm not, whataboutism has a complicated history, and actually whataboutism was initially used by people to shut down, has always been used by people to shut down the critique of U.S. empire, right? And at the same time, I think sometimes it's fair to complexify a conversation. That being said, to see the likes of Marco Rubio, who is a dangerous empty suit, he manages to pull that fusion off. Tweeting, first of all, showing the ball by tweeting out a photo of a sodomized and murdered Muammar Gaddafi, the transparent face of the sociopathic U.S. empire that he is the point man for in Latin America. And then to say, oh, well, there are these power outages in Venezuela, they're terrible. What word did you have to say for 11 months when Puerto Rico, which is an exploited U.S. colony, and I mean that in a literal sense, a colony, was without power for 11 months? And now people in Puerto Rico are having their food stamps cut so there can be a massive austerity wave to pay off vulture funds. No word about that, but there's some problems in Venezuela. Now, again, in the long term, is there problems in Venezuela's infrastructure, which is the result of all the things we already know? U.S. sanctions, U.S. interference, and governmental mismanagement. Yes, we already know that. Is the timing of these blackouts a bit suspicious? Yup. Some people with information from people like Snowden and who are sort of tuned to that world, they say it is possible that the United States can do something like this. Obviously, I would put nothing past the intelligence services, the CIA, or...
I mean, after Stuxnet, I mean...
Yeah, I mean, right. Right, precisely. I mean, we blew out, we created a global computer virus because of something that was supposed to target Iran specifically. Or Israel did. Was that us or Israel? Or a partnership?
I think it was a partnership.
It was a partnership.
Yeah, I think it was Israel maybe taking point.
So, yes, we could be doing this. It also could be an organic problem in Venezuela, which is why the answer is, and if you actually cared about the well-being of Venezuela in a diplomatic process, you would immediately remove all sanctions on everything to do with food and services to the population. And A, you could help get their infrastructure going again, or B, if the problems remained exactly the same without constant U.S. economic terrorism, then you could actually definitively say this is all Maduro's fault, which is totally impossible to say now. But here is Elliot Abrams, who should be only known for lying to Congress about Iran-Contra and spinning war crimes, mass murder, and genocide from Latin America and human rights abuses from Latin America to the Middle East. Here he is. These exchanges are interesting. First, it's on the power grid. And secondly, it's just the ongoing U.S. imperial approach to who gets recognized as the legitimate power in Venezuela.
Yeah, we come in after he asks the power grid question.
Cause of the blackout. And second, could you explain to us the article under which Mr. Guaido declared himself president? It is said that it has expired last month. Could you explain that to us?
Yes.
What is it?
On the blackout, we're not there. I believe there is a consensus now that by far the most likely explanation is that these extremely high voltage lines, which tend to bow as the months go and years go by, that is, they are not straight, they tend to sag is a good word, into trees and bushes. And that creates the possibility of a fire. That is what I would say more experts have given as the explanation. So how do you avoid that? It's simple. You cut and prune and keep trees and bushes from approaching the lines, and they haven't done that. There's really been no maintenance, not just for years, but for decades.
So
stop terrorizing their economy.
Well, there's that, and this may be too conspiratorial. This is just me spitballing here, but the way that he says over months and years, and they haven't done this over decades, makes it seem like intelligence agencies have noticed that, and they're like, "Oh, this would be a really good thing to blame when we need to."
Right. No, I don't think. Yeah, I think
it's a good out.
It's a good out.
There's really been no maintenance, not just for years, but for decades. On those, they have 3 high voltage lines coming essentially from the Guri Dam. That's our best explanation. It is not formed obviously by examination, but rather by reports that we've seen from a fair number of experts. As to the Venezuelan constitution, the National Assembly has passed a resolution that states that 30-day period of interim presidency will not start ending or counting until the day Nicolas Maduro leaves power. So the 30 days doesn't start now. It starts after Maduro. And that's a resolution of the National Assembly.
When did they did that? After he...
They did that, this is roughly a month ago. We could try to find the date for you.
When he was took the mantle of
when
president, that wasn't there.
That's correct.
Can you
and
do
so
that
people,
ex post facto like
when
that?
people ask the question, how do
like saying, you know, I was elected for 4 years to be president, and then 2 years in, you changed the rules so that your term didn't start, hasn't even started yet.
Exactly.
No.
It's because I'm smart.
You don't get a vote because you're not in the National Assembly. But we...
Does the U.S. view that as constitutional under their system?
Yes. I mean, we're taking the National Assembly is the only legitimate democratic institution left in Venezuela. And their interpretation of the Constitution, as you know, is that as of the date of this alleged term for Maduro, the presidency is vacant. But they have also said that that 30-day period starts when Maduro goes.
So Guaido is the interim president of an interim that doesn't exist yet.
The 30-day end to his interim presidency starts counting because he's not in power. That's the problem. Maduro is still there. So they have decided that they will count that from when he actually is in power and Maduro is gone. I think it's logical.
So then he isn't interim president.
He is interim president, but he's not able to exercise the powers of the office because Maduro still is there.
So their interpretation is that until and unless he actually has the power to run the country, he's not actually
No,
the interim president?
their interpretation is that the Constitution requires a 30-day interim period, but those 30 days should not be counted while Maduro is still there exercising the powers of his former office.
So this is the actual bureaucratic spin of U.S. coups. There is a technical rule, which we've made up on the fly, because we've made up on the fly that we recognize one source of power overriding all other institutions and legitimacies in Venezuela. And we then make up an imaginary rule to justify the other imaginary source of power that we've recognized.
It's almost like if you've ever played with, like a niece or a nephew or something like that, where you're like, oh, here's this world I've made up, and these are the rules by which you have to participate in my game. And you're like, okay, sure, I guess we're going to do that. Except this guy has the power of the entire intelligence apparatus of the U.S.
Right. Except
government.
this guy's actively trying to institute a coup right now in
it's like
Venezuela.
It's like all those like that old Chomsky book, like What We Say Goes, or those sorts of titles. Like, yeah, like we can just basically bullshit this into reality.
That's it.
Who knows that better than Elliot Abrams, really?
Elliot Abrams covered up some of the worst, the types of things that the Reagan administration, with appointment of Elliot Abrams, backed in places like El Salvador and Guatemala, would make ISIS look twice. All right, we'll finish this kind of global tour. We'll go to Brazil, Latin America tour. Okay. First, I want to just say, about a little over a week ago, the AFL-CIO gave Luis Inácio Lula da Silva its Human Rights Award, and they recognized him for what he was, a president that brought tens of millions of people out of poverty, left the presidency with record approval ratings, and also was somebody that, because he was a poor, illiterate, self-made, until he was an adult, he learned to read, union organizer who lost fingers working in a factory, who helped end the military dictatorship in the 80s through his activism, and was a very, very successful social democratic president in the grand scheme of things, including especially what was possible in the years he governed from 2002 to 2010. So everybody, look, part of the reason I talk about Lula a lot is because he is this incredibly important figure, and because it is genuinely extraordinary and horrifying that you can put somebody in jail and wage a ruthless campaign against them and their political party and the democratic apparatus of the center left in Brazil with no material evidence is mind-boggling. Especially from my perspective, because, look, I'm a person of the world, and I have no doubt that while the charges against him of taking things like a apartment after he was president, which isn't even illegal anyways, and is pales in comparison to the speaking fees and consultancy. Tony Blair is hopping across the globe, making literally tens of millions of dollars advising dictators and oil funds and all the rest of it. And we're putting an incredible leader in jail for a economy, middle-class apartment on the beach that there isn't even any evidence in terms of writing or legal documents to connect him to. It's all based off of the testimony of somebody who pleaded out. So I think it's terrifying in and of itself, and I think it's a great wrong to a good person and a great leader. But I also think, especially as Brazil comes more alive in U.S. discourse, because all of a sudden people are sort of taken up by the horror show of Bolsonaro, who is just, he's like Trump. He's one of the worst people on planet Earth. And whether you're concerned about the environment or the Amazon or indigenous people or LGBTQ people, or you have a concern and understanding of labor and pensions, this is a relentless assault, not to mention the crisis that could be set off if they continue to instigate with Venezuela. So it's first that there is a context that gets Bolsonaro to power, and you can't understand it without understanding the totally illegitimate removal of Dilma Rousseff from power in 2016. You can't understand it without the jailing of Lula da Silva, who led Bolsonaro in the polls. Could you imagine if Lula was at the White House with Trump instead of Bolsonaro? No crisis in Venezuela. No Amazon on the chopping block. No clawed back protections for LGBTQ people. And I think that there is a certain type of person, and part of it is because of the just atrocious and unpardonable coverage from The Guardian and the New York Times and Vox and others. And I'm not saying, look, they're not in the opinion business. Of course, it's not their job and their reporter's job to say he's innocent, free him. But it is their job to say, to report the facts of the case instead of just repeating the pablum of the discredited Brazilian judiciary and Brazilian elites. There's no material evidence, and the person who put him in jail without any material evidence is the justice minister in this fantastically fascistic Bolsonaro government. So in any country, wouldn't it be an interesting story for the Times or the Guardian to report, the lead candidate, who was the former president, who was universally respected and regarded, was put in jail without any material evidence by an independent prosecutor backed by the United States, who then became the justice minister in a new far-right extremist government that has its own, already within a couple of months, infinitely more serious corruption allegations. Maybe that's just an interesting thing to write about. Maybe that's just worth looking at. And the last thing I'll say, too, if you want to have solidarity, if you go to the Brazilian left, and if you're on social media, obviously, upper class Brazilians mostly, and people speaking English they're going to be part of the people who've been propagandized on this issue. But if you want actual solidarity with the left, they will tell you, we need to free Lula. This is part, if you want to be solidarity with us against Bolsonaro, you need to deal with this issue and not, bail on it, because it's actually fundamental to understanding what's happening in Brazil and also the U.S. role of what's happening in Brazil. I don't know. I am increasingly convinced. I know that the DOJ backed Lava Jato. I know that U.S. foreign policy was moved towards reversing these pink-tide governments. I think it's quite bizarre Bolsonaro visited the CIA, and I am not convinced that the ongoing imprisonment of Lula and taking him off the board and delegitimization of the Workers' Party was not part of that conversation. This is a report from Michael Fox at the Real News Network, and I want to highlight this because this is the new social movement that's brewing in Brazil to free Lula, and these activists will tell you themselves that you cannot separate this broader struggle from that imprisonment.
Social movements and left political parties met in Sao Paulo over the weekend to relaunch the campaign to free former President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva.
It's important to free Lula because he represents each and every one of us. He represents our victories. If he's in jail, each of us are in jail. It means our rights are going down the drain.
More than 1,000 people attended the event. At the meeting, they organized plans for a series of actions to coincide with the one-year anniversary of Lula's imprisonment on April 7th. Under Lula's presidency, millions were lifted out of poverty. He left office with an 87% approval rating. He's still one of the country's most popular leaders. But he was jailed last year after he was convicted of accepting a beachside apartment from a company seeking government contracts. Judges ruled against him in a second conviction earlier this year, involving this time a country property an hour north of Sao Paulo. But his supporters and many legal experts say he's innocent, and that the convictions were a means of blocking him from returning to power. They say Judge Sergio Moro was politically motivated. Moro has long held connections to the country's right wing. He's now President Jair Bolsonaro's justice minister.
We in the Brazilian Association of Lawyers for Democracy have been following this case for a long time, from the very beginning, with lawyers from across the country. And we consider both rulings against Lula to be complete judicial aberrations. There is no evidence against Lula.
So that's it. And it was great that the letter a couple of weeks ago that the group of Congress people sent out registering all their concerns about Bolsonaro's assault on Brazil at least included a paragraph on how the barring of Lula from the presidential elections, the most popular politician in the country, undermined democratic institutions. But this needs to become much more clear, much more aggressive, and much more robust. He is a political prisoner. And you cannot separate that from a broader concern set about Brazil. Is this in Houston or?
Yeah,
Houston?
Deer Park, Texas. I've been by Houston.
Deer Park, Texas in Houston. Really terrible story. Basically, there's been a fire at a chemical plant, and people need to be indoors. Look, let's politicize this in a way so maybe this might actually not happen in this country someday. This is going to affect thousands of people's health. This is from the city of Deer Park. Go inside immediately, seek the nearest enclosed structure, whether it's a house, business, garage, or vehicle. If you know of any unattended child in your neighborhood, call them and tell them to remain indoors. Keep any pets indoors also. Gather emergency supplies like portable radio, flashlight, and extra batteries. Close all doors, windows, and other sources of outside air. Turn off air conditioning or heating systems and close the fireplace damper to keep chemical vapors from entering. Ceiling fans or rotary fans inside the buildings can be safely used to keep cool. Cover any gapes, holes, or cracks with wet towels or sheets to prevent vapors from entering your home. If you have trouble breathing, contact 911. So, we're going to play a couple clips of it. We are a massively underregulated society where companies can regularly disregard and jeopardize public health, and Texas, who is held up as a pinnacle of how to live by the right. Well, I don't want to live like this. Let's check it out.
This is Mia Savage of ABC 13.
This is Maya Shea. We're coming to you, of course, upwind from the ITC containment facility, where right now at least 7 containers are burning. And, you know, we've seen plant officials say, hey, everything's under control. We monitor the air. It's all within the limits. We talked to some environmentalists, including the man with Airlines Houston. He says, hey, your eyes are not deceiving you.
Well, I think, you know, just by looking behind me, you can tell that this is not normal. This is not fine. And like I said, the only thing that's preventing this from being a major catastrophe is favorable weather conditions.
Everything is not fine. That's why it's important to stay on top of the information about what's in these chemicals. We must have transparency from the government and from the company involved, and we will be keeping on top of this to give you the latest information.
And then we have just more raw footage of this. I mean, again, deregulation kills.
Bravo on that report, too, by the way.
Bravo on that report. Incredible reporting from Michelle Shea.
She said Maya Shea?
Maya Shea?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Savage on Twitter. But
Maya Shea. Excellent reporting. Excellent local reporting there.
Gosh. And I mean,
and the company is spinning that this is, it's fine.
Yeah, it's okay.
Everything's under control. There's a massive chemical fire. Of course, several years ago, there was a fertilizer explosion in Texas that killed several people. And then, of course, we get more and more disclosures every day of PG&E's conduct in California. I would say, look, more provocatively, capitalism. This is a fundamental logic of capitalism, all right? But if you want to even keep it in the bounds of, that is my fundamental diagnosis if I'm being, transparent. But if you want to keep it in the bounds of a more sort of narrow debate, deregulation kills. You're calling from a 724 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Hi.
Hi.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Hi. Hey, my name is Wu. I'm from Pittsburgh.
Hey, Wu. What's going on?
Hey, so I kind of wanted to get your take on well, I feel like a lot of people in the chat are going to be rolling their eyes at this, but the whole Andrew Yang phenomenon that's currently happening.
I
What's that?
think so.
You want my take on Andrew Yang?
I've been thinking not so much Yang himself, but I have mixed feelings on the UBI proposal as well as being interesting, but not really the way it's implemented. I'm more interested in the whole phenomenon surrounding him and how so many of these alt-right guys who are totally supporting Trump seem to have completely shifted in our full-on Yang team right now.
Well, here's my thing. Not to cut you off, but it's like, I just want to say, first of all, most Trump guys don't know who the hell Andrew Yang is, right? Like, this is a total internet thing. So, and honestly, if we're going to really narrow it to just a question of what people are doing with their internet time, I'd prefer Yang memes to Trump memes. So that's a slight modicum of improvement, I guess. I mean, yes, it is. It is. But, I mean, did you have but I think it makes sense. I mean, there's a perception among some people that they can get a check transfer to be on 4chan and play video games all day. I mean, makes sense.
Well, it definitely makes me a little bit happier to see people moving towards memeing something that's, not as outwardly hateful or just based on like completely asinine, terrible rhetoric as much as, the Trump stuff has been. But it does make me wonder, like, what do these guys even stand for in the first place? Like, did any of these people ever even actually have any real values behind supporting like a conservative movement, or is it just all in like the novelty?
Probably not. I don't know.
Outrageous.
I don't really care.
Yeah.
I mean, but I will say this. I think that, and I've tried to be, I went off on Andrew Yang for the first time, and I guess we'll probably post it on TMBS soon. But my until very recently, my basic call on Yang has been what I just said, which is like, I prefer you meme for Yang than Trump. So cool, whatever. Substantively, it seems to me that if you dig into his proposals and watch his interviews, which I've done a little bit, I should say, I mean, he seems like a very nice guy, but it's a Trojan horse for libertarianism. And even if it's an opt-in system, it's insane that you would opt in for $1,000 a month and get rid of even food stamps alone. I mean, if you actually crunch the numbers on this, this is not good for poor people.
He vindicates what we've been saying about UBI.
Yeah, he vindicates our concern and critique of UBI for longstanding. And then the other thing is when he said a couple of weeks ago that there's some people in, you know, elite circles that discount the suffering of like a laid-off white worker, and that's wrong. I happen to agree with him. Now, I wouldn't frame it that way because I'm not interested in frankly, the worker could be black, could be Asian, could be white, could be what, you know, that doesn't matter to me. A worker is a worker. But there's no doubt that he's right, that there's some people in the sort of like woke Twitterati that you'll get some garbage take from of like, oh, well, I don't want to hear about it, right? Like, you know, the opioid crisis is white people or whatever. First of all, that's not any type of official policy from any type of leader or anything. But, you know, just like you can catch a bad take from any, you can always catch a bad take. So I didn't really have a problem with that. But the other night on TMBS, and granted it was one tweet, but it was a tweet that he put out about birth rates and America becoming majority minority. And as soon as you start talking like that, I'm done. Done. You know, the politeness is gone because whatever it is you think you're doing, what you're playing to there is the most dangerous, disgusting sentiments.
And by
in
the
this
way,
country.
he's going on Ben Shapiro's show, it looks like.
Right, of course he's going to go on Ben Shapiro. And again, I don't really begrudge him that either, but I just think we got to realize that this is a center-right media exercise, and people should get a little bit more sophisticated about policy. Thanks for the call, man.
It is stuff like that that makes me skeptical of Yang, and I do feel like this is going to eventually really turn around to hurt him with like saying those kind of statements. Some of the people he's associated himself with.
Well, will it hurt? Will it hurt
that
him though
somebody
if his goal? I mean, I guess I'm not to interrupt you, but it's like if his goal is to like get a great email list and go on Joe Rogan and be a meme. I don't know. He's already achieved that goal. Like, I'm sorry, I'm not trying to be an asshole, but it's like
he's not trying to be president.
Yeah, he's not a stupid guy. He knows he's not going to be president. So what is he doing? I had no idea who Andrew Yang was 4 months ago. Now I do. Success.
More or less, yeah. I mean, I do think the one positive that could come out of this is the fact that somebody from this kind of more sort of center-right perspective is pushing conversation about wealth inequality, not so much wealth inequality, but just like wealth in general to like a larger portion of people that might have not have been receptive to these arguments before. And it can maybe push the left more to talking about getting more radical, more progressive, and talking about how they would address the kind of things.
I think so. I don't agree with that.
I think he's muddying the waters. I think if he was doing this in the GOP, it'd be better for everybody.
Yeah, if he was running, you know, that's exactly right. If he was challenging Trump in the Republican primary, he would be great. But coming in and, again, even like the work that needs to be done in this country to de-ideologize people from like the idea that capitalism is just some metaphysical force that you just have to let do its thing, and the only thing you could possibly hope to do is like clean up the mess in its wake, requires so much work, and that's all this guy does. I mean, the truth of the matter is, I mean, again, what's really provocative, I mean, Tucker Carlson, who's doing the opposite sort of game and making feints but he actually used that example himself. Tucker Carlson said, I believe to Ben Shapiro, I watched this. He's like, if you told me that a new driverless car is eliminating 20 million jobs, I would say no. I would regulate it out of existence. And that, frankly, is the right answer. Not companies can do whatever the hell they want. And here's a little cash transfer. I mean, if you really think out the logic of that, that's extraordinarily dystopian. And behind the smiling face of Yang, I see the leering face of Peter Thiel. Thanks for the call, Wu. All right, one more call. You're calling from a 972 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Hey, Michael. sorry for the noise.
Sorry, I can't hear you, man. I can't hear you, man. The connection is
That's
horrible.
a very strange connection.
No.
Yeah, it's not working. Sorry about that. Sorry. That's
It's like
literally-
a video game, like from the 90s.
Yeah.
Like, no.
Yeah, that wasn't working. You're calling from a 913 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Hello, this is me. I am Edward Goose from Kansas City.
Hey, Edward, what's up? What's on your mind?
Hey, first time caller, so I'm kind of nervous.
Oh,
But,
welcome to the show.
I wanted to talk about the Stacey Abrams clip that you played.
What Stacey Abrams clip? We didn't play any Stacey Abrams clip. From when?
Oh, no, not the Stacey Abrams. The clip you played about Venezuela. I can't remember Elliot Abrams. Sorry.
Oh, Elliot.
So, yeah,
Okay.
I'm sorry. Such a flip right there.
No worries.
So I don't know if you guys noticed, but the guy's body language while he was talking was so nefarious looking
Yes.
to me. And I saw this on Telesur yesterday. And I have to say, like, made me very nervous as, like, a guy from the Midwest kind of would be about fascism. But I'm trying to understand, like, how it is so easy for somebody to pull something so, like, obviously such a lie. Like, he's sitting there talking about, well, Maduro has to leave, and then the process can begin. Isn't that already in the Constitution?
Well, as
That
far
the
as
president
this
has to be out of office?
this guy is, this guy lied about, literal massacres where children were 2-year-olds were bayoneted. This guy has, of course,
Oh my God.
he has zero conscience. I mean, really, look him up. This guy has a tremendous amount of blood on his hands. I appreciate the call, man. Thank you.
And it is
Yeah.
true. He looks
No, he
terrifying.
does. He's right. The
It's
call
like
is
a Jeff
right.
Dunham puppet,
John
but like brought to
It's
life.
true.
John Swartz from The Intercept has a lot of good pieces on Abrams and like tracking him through the Contras to now.
You got to read. Yeah, John Swartz is indispensable on Abrams.
Stacey Elliott Abrams in Atlanta.
That's a good bit.
Making sure people
actually.
can vote any means necessary.
Yeah, I wish that's how it would be. Like Alexander Colburn had one of the most fun theories of who Jeeves is in the Worcester and Jeeves books, and Colburn said it's like, I think it's Iago. Is that the character in Othello who poisons Othello? And he said Jeeves is almost like a repentant Iago, just sort of like quietly doing penance by doing like small pieces of good for like dumb British aristocrats. So Elliot Abrams, if he wanted to wash some of the blood off of his hands, could apply his sociopathy to voting rights in Georgia. Yes, that would be a very nice redemptive arc that will never happen. Train Boy, breaking. Dane County judge issues a temporary injunction blocking laws passed by the GOP in a lame duck session limiting the power of Governor Evers and Attorney General Josh Qual. That's what's happening in Wisconsin. That's important. Steve Durr, UBI can be cool, but people need to know that Andrew Yang's UBI is a dubious libertarian leaning, and the candidate himself seems to be a white supremacist. I think let's not.
It's hard to know it in his heart, but he's certainly not sensitive to like not playing footsie with.
Well, this is what I'm saying is that, but I think this is actually a good lesson for the left. Let's save those, like, that's an ultimate punch, so let's save that a little bit. Whereas I said yesterday on Twitter, he's nice guy dog whistling, which is 100% true. Like, that's objective. See, as soon as you say that, then I can get into an argument with somebody about whether or not he is. And I don't want to get into that. What I want to just say is, why the fuck was he tweeting that about birth rates? Yeah, exactly. That's all I care about.
It's like playing Dragon Ball fighters and doing the heavy attack all the time. You need to mix some light attacks.
Right. And now I agree with you. He specifically talked about Americans being underdogs in their own land, white birth rates, how immigrants shouldn't be here, and there's a reason why there's a white supremacist meme culture around him. He's directly speaking to white supremacists. I increasingly think that's true. Fran from Philadelphia. Michael, you mentioned maybe on TMBS an interview with someone named Daniel Moyne regarding critique of liberal rights discourse. You know what I'm talking about? And you have more details so I can find it.
Samuel Moyne?
Yeah, Samuel Moyne. Well, if you are a Samuel Moyne, not Daniel Moyne, he wrote Daniel Moyne. It's Samuel Moyne, and if you are a TMBS patron, you can find it. It is Its rights are not enough: an illicit history of human rights and the problems with human rights as a discourse, and also a history of Western philosophy from Aristotle to Marx. It's great. Patreon.com/TMBS. John McCain's parachute. I'm just glad no one is blasting me for once saving his life. Mitch McConnell's egg. Solidarity with splattered brethren in Brazil and Australia. I sit here with my clutch awaiting deployment. I lay here contemplating on which his chins shall my proteins splatter. Colin from Nebraska. Hey, Michael, who do you reference after you mentioned the Nebraska flooding yesterday? Lena Khan. I tried to look her up, but I couldn't find anything. Oh, well, Lena Khan is someone who writes on monopolies, but it's not Conn. That's, if you spelled it like that, it's Khan. Lena Khan. Khan. Brock from VA. I just rewatched City of God the other day. The DVD extras they have, it's a 1999 documentary called News from a Personal War that documents a drug task force and police corruption in 1990s Brazil. And one police commissioner talks about how he was appointed to combat corruption, but when he prosecutes a wealthy farmer for murdering his wife, he's suddenly not invited to any big galas and social events where he was formerly celebrated. It's up for free on YouTube, an interesting pre-Lula era doc. Well, that era is not so pre right now, Bolsonaro. A waterboat from Kashmir. Speaking of glorified government contractors, the facility where Elon Musk assembles his rockets, specifically designed and built in the late 90s and early 2000s for assembling rockets that would replace the space shuttle. The cost of building this facility was close to $10 billion in the 1990s, and this is before PayPal and before he dreamed of rockets. This guy couldn't assemble his rockets, let alone get them off the ground, if there wasn't existing infrastructure. 100%, of course. Wow. Jim, he just tweeted this out?
Yeah, about an hour ago.
So Israel withdrew from the Golan Heights under Ehud Barak, I believe, in like the late 90s. I need to know more about the Golan Heights, but it's very weird. Donald Trump, after 52 years, it's time for the United States to recognize Israel's sovereignty over the Golan Heights, which is of critical strategic importance to the state of Israel and regional stability. Okay, yeah, the Golan Heights are a settled issue. Maybe they're implicated again from Israeli thinking because of the Syrian civil war. But, look, I'll talk more about the Israeli elections and go more over Israel, but there's a complete synchronization. They're all synchronized. Israel is a far-right ethno-state that administers apartheid, and they get more transparent every single day. So
Netanyahu already tweeted out his thanks.
Right, so the real question is, and I'll mug up on that and get that covered, but the real question is, again, I've heard that Elizabeth Warren isn't going to go to AIPAC. That's a good small step. Beto O'Rourke specifically said that Netanyahu placed a racist, but then also he said some nonsense about Abbas, which just is a total false power equivalency. But, if you have pretensions of even sort of just basic center-right, center-left sort of anti-bigoted leadership, it's totally untenable to support Israel. Totally untenable. Okay, Thames Darwin. Michael, the Golan Heights were unilaterally annexed in 1981 after being occupied in 1967, and they are still occupied. Oh, you're right. Oh, this is totally my bad. Barak evacuated South Lebanon, but not the Golan. Okay, you're right. You're right. My bad. So, yes, this is an area that Israel still illegally occupies, and just like moving the capital from, to Jerusalem, this is just more of the Trump administration formally backing Israeli apartheid and similar policies. You're calling from a 408 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Hello?
Hello, 408. Are you there?
Hello. Hey, hi, Michael. I'm a first-time caller. I'm calling from the Bay Area.
Calling from where? The Bay Area?
The Bay Area.
What's
California.
your name?
Yep. Eric.
Hey, Eric. What's on your mind, man? Thanks for calling.
Hey, thank you, man. So I just wanted to call in, and did a great piece on the PG&E scandal here that hit all of California, how they've been rising the prices on us here constantly. And, one of the things I never got is why does the top just continue raising the prices, but their lack of funding to actual pruning of the trees close to those wires that got affected in all over California, and the neglect from those top level continue to get paid and continue to get bailed out on a constant basis when us, the people, suffer. If it isn't bad enough that you got all these tech companies ruining the job market for regular sector people living here in San Francisco and all that, and then PG&E is another level, but the government is actually backing them, and they're going to let these top level executives walk out.
Well, I mean, I totally agree. I totally agree with you, and the reason that I would say is because of corruption, oligarchy, capitalism. I mean, this is where it becomes broken record-like, but that's the only answer. I mean, yes, PG&E has executives and has people. They are not even, I believe, there's some type of public-private hybrid. David Grisham is the guy who's covered that extensively for the Michael Brooks Show, and you should look up those videos on our YouTube channel because it's important in of itself, but it's a great case study for understanding how our world works. And the reason they do is because they are connected with politicians, because they fund campaigns, and because elites are not accountable in this society. And because there's also a mythology about markets.
So with that principle that you're saying, I feel like these tech companies have all bought out the politicians in this area, minus Rokana, which is right up the way from where I live,
right,
in the South Bay.
Right.
So he's in Fremont, but here in San Jose, in the South Bay, we're seeing huge levels of poverty, of homelessness occurring because houses that used to be, even just 10 years ago, used to be 300, 400, 500,000. Now a single family home, 1,000 square feet over here in the South Bay will run you 1.6 million.
Yep.
Yep. And that's part of, is this all stemming from that same, where the politicians are allowing these people to just run wild with the...
It's capitalism. Again, honestly, this really is a case. That is it. If you have unregulated markets and you let, quote unquote, markets do what they're supposed to do, you will concentrate wealth. You will create centers and peripheries. So right now we're in an economic cycle, and what's, of course, it's an irony of history. Maybe in 30 or 40 years, Silicon Valley will be like Detroit because the sort of base of economic production will migrate, right? There are different types of cycles of geography and types of capitalism we practice. But right now, you have an unregulated, totally untamed market. When you do that, it doesn't create more competition and openness. It creates self-dealing monopolies and ever greater and greater economic but also social concentration. If you read Corey Pine's book, he's like, there was still people even a couple years ago huffing the glue of the Silicon Valley dream. And he was like, no, if you go here, the way you get into a Silicon Valley startup is you go to Stanford. And an incredibly small handful of people. And then actually, no matter how dumb your startup idea is, you probably can get some venture capital. If not, you won't get it. And the money concentrates. And then that leads to gentrification. And again, if you don't impose rent controls, if you don't impose, if you don't have mass public housing, I know other people think that the, NIMBYism is the big problem. Maybe that is on some level, but it's a second order problem. You're going to get middle class, working class, and increasingly even in places like the Bay and parts of New York, upper middle class people simply not able to afford there. And then you're going to also create a whole other set where it's an inviting market for oligarchs to just park their money. There's apartments all over Manhattan that I guarantee you they're occupied a week of the year. It's a place to sit money.
Should be seized.
They should be seized. They should be made public and redistributed to the population, 100%. So that's it.
You feel the same pain in New York. You feel the same pain in New York as we do in the Bay Area, like in San Francisco, you know. And
everybody's feeling it to some degree or another. Every place that isn't, and then on the flip side, you know, a place like Detroit literally has areas where wildlife have like ecologies have grown back up in an abandoned city, and kids, you know, I was listening to this piece about Detroit the other day, and this journalist pointed out that there was a small family home next to, you know, some like unfinished construction site or something. And basically something where like if a little kid's out playing, they could seriously hurt themselves. And there's no mechanism from the city to do anything about it because it's an abandoned periphery. And that has always been the cycle. That's how markets work. You have centers where the capital flows into, and then it's either extracted ruthlessly from the peripheries, and then it's abandoned. I mean, that's the cycle.
I agree. I feel like just this part of the Bay Area got really messed over with Adobe and Google out buying everything. And our congresswoman, I don't even think she represents the majority of San Jose. You know,
what's her name?
Zoe Lofgren.
Zoe Lofgren. Okay.
Zoe Lofgren. Yeah, and I've never ever seen her around here. But yet she was one of the people grilling people on Google, asking about those dumb Trump questions. You remember that, right?
Right. Yeah.
They're like, oh, is there a right wing? They're banning it. They're making all this stuff in social media about. But she was one of the ones that asked a good question.
All right, we gotta keep it moving, Eric. But I really appreciate the call, man. I'm just seeing the time. No, it was a great call. I'm just seeing we have to end pretty soon, so I got to keep it going. But thank you so much, man. Appreciate it.
I appreciate you taking the call.
Hang on there,
I'll call
buddy.
back in.
Please do. Thanks, man. All right, let's just go through a couple more pieces of sound because we got to end soon, but we should do a few more pieces. Let's do both of these Elizabeth Warren clips, and then if we have time, we'll do that union clip. So Elizabeth Warren had her town hall the other night. Sam played the main takeaway yesterday. Abolish the Electoral College. Excellent. She's 100% right. I'm glad she's putting points on the board like this. And I think this was a pretty good answer on white supremacy as like an actual security threat. And again, on one hand, I want us to kind of introduce way less securitization discourse into our politics in general. And on the other hand, obviously things like Christ Church or Tree of Life Synagogue are white supremacy-based terrorism.
Good evening. Since the election of Donald Trump, the number of hate crimes has increased and white supremacists have become more emboldened online and in public. What are your plans to unite the country?
Oh, good. Thank you for that question. You know, it starts with the fact that we've got to recognize the threat posed by white nationalism. White supremacists pose a threat to the United States like any other terrorist group, like ISIS, like Al-Qaeda, and leadership starts at the top. And that means you've got to call it out. No sitting by. And then when you call it out, as President of the United States, you got to use the tools available to you. And that means get the Justice Department, when they break the law, to go after them with full prosecution. That's what I can do. Thank you.
I think that's a good answer. I think
she also mentioned the stuff Obama was doing with the DOJ and police departments in another part of the town hall.
Okay, that's good because that was the connection that I was going to draw. It has to be a part of a whole, again, it's a very weird balance to pull off because I generally think that obviously something like the Department of Homeland Security is an enormously problematic thing whose power and access I do not want to expand. But obviously to the extent all of these agencies have power and have a role to play in legitimately disrupting crime and terrorism, obviously right-wing and white supremacist terrorism needs to be at the center of that because that is objectively what the biggest threat is right now inside the United States. And in fact, of course, has been historically. But in addition to that, you need to connect it to a whole broad sweep of police violence, of racial discrimination policies and violence across the board, particularly with regards to law enforcement. That's the dialectic you need to pull off. But that's great that she connected those themes, and that's a good answer. Here's the problem with Elizabeth Warren. She keeps equivocating on Medicare for all. And if you listen and talk to somebody like Jamila Mishner, who is one of the premier scholars of Medicaid and healthcare in this country, while balancing this nuanced and brilliant history of the compromises of things like the New Deal and the Great Society, I asked her, I said, you know, what do you think about the Sanders and Jayapal bills? And, you know, her basic perspective was, if these bills get passed, we are light year. Like, Americans are in another planet in terms of better off. And the only concern that she has is the robustness of long-term care in both of these bills. So the point I'm bringing up by saying that from a serious scholar and a real like humanitarian like that, frankly, is single payer is in some respects the compromise. And the only valid conversation, the only valid moral conversation you have about this, the only valid political conversation you can have about this is the extent to which you are going to fully fill out from mental to dental to every type of conceivable care, universal health care, and completely get rid of the parasite HMO insurance company model. Period. Full stop. So on the merits, this is so disturbing that she equivocates about this. And then the politics, how she understands politics. Bernie totally understands that in order to pass any type of even remotely progressive program, you need a totally mobilized society. And so when she equivocates like this, it's like, is she thinking about that mobilization, or is she thinking about some wonky negotiation process? And that's a big concern for me. So let's play that.
He has a question about Medicare for all. Jay.
All right.
Senator Warren, thank you so much for being here this evening and your tireless advocacy for universal health care. As a supporter of universal health care and an advocate for organized labor, I do worry about the current bill's elimination of private health insurance.
Oh, yeah.
As that would eliminate the private health employer-based plans that so many unions have advocated for.
It's a dumb question.
Can you explain how Medicare for all would be better for workers than simply improving the Affordable Care Act?
Okay, so it's a good question. Let's start with our statement that we should make every time we start to talk about changes in our health care. And that is, health care is a basic human right, and we fight for basic human rights. And then let's put these in order, because I appreciate that your question starts with the Affordable Care Act. Let's all remember, when we're talking about what's possible, let's start where we are and the difference between Democrats and Republicans. Right now, Democrats are trying to figure out how to expand health care coverage at the lowest possible cost so everybody is covered. Republicans, right this minute, are out there trying to repeal the Affordable Care Act. They've got a lawsuit pending down in Texas where they're trying to roll it back, what they couldn't do with a vote, they're trying to do with the courts. HHS every day is doing what they can to undermine the Affordable Care Act. So when we're talking about health care in America right now, the first thing we need to be talking about is defend the Affordable Care Act, protection under the Affordable Care Act. Then part two. Let's make the improvements that are what I think of as the low-hanging fruit. For example, let's bring down the cost of prescription drugs all across this country. We got lots of ways we can do that. We can import drugs from Canada where the safety standards are the same. That would cut costs dramatically. We can negotiate prices under Medicare. That would cut costs dramatically. And I've got a proposal to help bring down the cost on generic drugs, which could be about 90% of all prescriptions. So let's get those costs down. And then you know what you're going to hear from a consumer advocate. And that is, we need to hold insurance companies accountable. And that means no tricking and trapping people on those insurance contracts. And then when we talk about Medicare for all, there are a lot of different pathways. What we're all looking for is the lowest cost way
No.
to make sure everybody gets covered. And some folks are talking about, let's start lowering the age. Maybe bring it down to 60, 55, 50. That helps cover people who are most at risk and can be helpful, for example, to the labor's plans. Some people say do it the other way. Let's bring it up from everybody under 30 gets covered by Medicare. Others say let employers be able to buy into the Medicare plans. Others say let's let employees buy into the Medicare plans. For me, what's key is we get everybody at the table on this, that labor's at the table, that people who have to buy on their own, everybody comes to the table together, and we figure out how to do Medicare for all in a way that makes sure that we're going to get 100% coverage in this country at the lowest possible cost for everyone. That's our job.
So, look, okay, all of the stuff about prescription drugs, that's great. In fact, she didn't even mention her most interesting plan, which is government producing its own drugs. That's actually a great proposal. That's fine. She's wrong. The midterms were the vote on protecting Obamacare. And those of us who are 100% pro Medicare for all and understand that is the only moral and policy answer, full stop, period, that Obamacare made great strides. Mostly on the coverage end, it was the expansion of Medicaid. And then it was essentially consumer protections. Now, I could tell you, which is also really important, and I could tell you, if you're on the exchanges, yes, it's of course better to possibly figure out a way to have health care than not. But it ain't good. And if you're in many different categories of people, even with subsidies, paying a lot of money for crappy private plans, and you think that that's durable, first of all, the companies will always push back and always eat their way out of obligations because they're parasitic. Their business model literally is built on taking your money and then denying you care. That's how the profits work. And then, on top of that, even though the Republicans, of course, are liars and their alternative is worse and horrific and obscene, and we pushed it off in 2017, they'll always have a talking point. As long as they're... in the beginning of Obamacare, I'll be transparent, I was so broke that the financial calculations did not make sense. Then I got to a point where I kind of figured out, look, I do it. I'm not thrilled. Like that actually hurts me financially, what I have to pay, and what I get ain't nothing.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
You're paying for a card if you're on any of these programs that aren't worker provided or job provided at this point.
That's it.
Or if you're on Medicaid.
It's ludicrous.
And that guy, it's a very weird question because, okay, you have employer insurance. Lovely. I thought you're a union organizer and you're aware that jobs are like this and like this and like this. And one of the biggest agreements even around Obamacare was people like Nancy Pelosi, of all people, saying if we decouple your ability to have health care from your job, you'll have more freedom, which is true. So
you still negotiate other things or even supplemental health insurance like they have in a lot of countries.
Right. So it's a very weird question. So first, her timeline's just off. I accept those of us who are Bernie did this perfectly. Medicare for all is the long-term goal. The short-term fight is fight the Republicans' effort to destroy Obamacare. Right now, and until 2020, and certainly if Democrats win, Obamacare is protected unless the courts do something insane, which is a whole other set of questions. So, wrong timeline. And then the bottom line is that it is not about a negotiation. It is not about this and that at the table. It is about these companies do not provide value, and every single category of conceivable human being in this country needs full, complete, no nonsense, no bullshit, point of contact healthcare. And also, quickly, we do know how we can get there. The Sanders and Jayapal plans are real plans. They may not be perfect, as nothing is perfect, but those are not goal-setting bills. Those aren't like a paragraph that say everybody should have health care. Those are detailed, scored out plans for how you do this. And they're the bare minimum. They're both good bills, particularly the Jayapal bill. That's it.
The way she says the goal is to try to get everybody covered as cheaply as possible, like how does she think that sounds appealing? Because
Right.
it's clear what is going to suffer in that calculation. It's going to be what you define as covering everybody.
Right. 100%.
Cheaply as possible is not my goal here.
Right. And it doesn't fit. Like, I don't know what lane she thinks she's playing in. She's got genuine claims to progressive and moral leadership. Why is she compromising that on healthcare? It makes no sense.
This sort of hedging towards, well, we got to be able to deliver something once we get into the room. It's like you're not in the room yet, so go in as aggressively as possible, so
And
that
she
you
was
have
somebody-
some sort of leg up.
And she said this contemporaneously. She was someone inside the Obama administration saying, what the hell are you doing?
Yeah.
So she already knows this. It's very peculiar to me. All right, a few more items, then we got to go. Greg from Oklahoma, I'm done hearing about how bad millennials have in terms of economic prospects. Us Gen Z kids are fucked even more so. Well, how about class solidarity instead of generational warfare? But I hear you. Kentucky Fried Comrade, hey, MR crew, you just got to say I'm disappointed in the coverage of Beto O'Rourke yesterday. Yes, he may be a milquetoast politician with a bad record, bad instincts, but there's something about him.
Exactly.
Something comforting.
I've been saying
Imagine
this.
being held in these gangly arms and those long white teeth reminding you of the look of America. Just saying. A Square, you want to be held?
Hashtag me too.
You've been saying you want to be held by Beto, Brendan?
I want my wife to look at Beto the way that she's never looked at me. Or I want her to look at me the way she looks at Beto.
Hashtag me too.
A Square, Mike, sorry to not be able to make the West Coast show, but it sounds great. I listened to the last few TMBS. You really think Warren's time has passed? I see her as a strong progressive, not as progressive as I would be, but a very viable candidate, and it looks like she's in it for the long game. No, I mean, I just think that 2016 was her time. Bernie waited for her to run, and she didn't, and he ran, and now he is the progressive leader. So even if she stays in it for the long term, and I have my questions about that, I'm not sure how long she can last. I actually think I would like her to last, but it's predicated on something happening to Bernie. So Bernie's ceiling, we'll see how far his ceiling goes, but his floor is, I think, the most clearly defined of any candidate. And now especially that you add a serious foreign policy to the mix, which of course he needs to get better on. I mean, I get it. It's like, I get it. Like, there's smart critiques of Bernie that I appreciate and are necessary. And then I think sometimes there's a little bit of kind of cosplay action. It's like, hey, well, why didn't Bernie say that he actually loves Maduro and wants to build a co-op? Okay, because he's running for fucking president. I'm sorry, right? But I just think the bottom line is he is, and more importantly, the argument and coalition he represents is running point. And it is a difference between a serious social democratic argument or a class-based argument or a class-based momentum. And I'm also telling you this anecdotally from talking to people that I would deem to, and a broad set of people, not people who are like coming in as pro-Bernie, but people who are totally smart, on-point people who are not political junkies. And even honestly, like, I'm a little embarrassed to say this, but like doing like mini focus groups, like not, like one-on-one. Hey, what do you think of this? Here's a few seconds of Warren. Here's a few seconds of Beto. Here's a few seconds of Bernie. And I'm telling you, across the board, with the obvious exception of the people you'd expect, which are affluent white people who are like, why does he look sloppy? Why is he yelling so much? Everybody else is like, yeah, that sounds like what we need. And he just stands out. And I think if Warren ran in 2016, I would have been all about it. But it's 2020. Fate Beats. Billy Woods and his collaboration with Armin Hammered are making great rap and political. Okay, I don't even know what that is. Cool.
One bit of news before
Yes.
we go. 2020 Democrats who have confirmed to Sahil Kapoor that they won't be attending AIPAC. Drumroll. Bernie Sanders, Kamala Harris, Elizabeth Warren, Beto O'Rourke, and Peter Buttigieg.
So I just want to say, the chutzpah of Kamala Harris, because her APAC speeches are some of the most craven APAC speeches I've seen in the history of Earth, which is, I mean, outside of course, someone like Chuck Schumer who still has the crown. But that's great.
Well, we'll see how people react to it after compared to how they react to Omar.
Josh's mom, can you tell Right Wing Mandela to come over? He's ghosting me. Probably shouldn't have read that one. All right. Okay. Final IM of the day. Jeffrey, Michael, are you ready to join the hashtag Gravel Gang? I've been seeing a lot of establishment Dems asking for $1 donations to reach the DNC's donor threshold. Funny how they can't seem to hit that magical number organically.
Gravel's way better than Yang.
Oh, yeah. I mean, if we have to have like a, meme-worthy, like kind of irony candidate, Mike Gravel was a great senator. Yes, like all energy that goes to Andrew Yang should be immediately pulled the plug on and go straight to Mike Gravel. He's great. I hope he enters the debates. All right, folks. See you tomorrow.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the light bar. But finding out won't make me feel any better. Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in, and my pilot light shining bright. I get somewhere the choice was made.